John Hardie is here. He's the Deputy Director of the Russia Program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Lots to get to here. I read an editorial in the BBC today arguing that Russia is already getting something out of this summit, and it's coming in the form of recognition from the world's most powerful country, the United States. They say the fact that this high-level meeting is happening gives the Kremlin the ability to argue that Russia is back at the top of the table of global politics. Do you agree with this premise, John? Did Russia ever stop being a top-tier global power? How do we measure such a thing?
Well, thanks for having me on. Certainly, Putin does get a certain kind of reputational benefit from the sort of sit down, the leader of the free world. That being said, it's not a reason not to do a summit. I think really what it comes down to is will the summit be productive toward the cause of peace? And to me, that depends on whether President Trump is ready to go into the Alaska meeting and be firm with Putin and to deliver the message that Russia has to start compromising on these maximalist demands, or else there just isn't any shot at peace.
We sent out a request to our viewers to send in questions to ask tonight. People sent in a lot of great questions. People are very curious about how this thing is going to work, the nuts and bolts of how something like this happens. I believe we need to get our CG-17 routed in because we need to show some of these questions off. One thing I'll ask you before we get into those is what kind of language are we going to be listening for from both Putin and Trump after this thing happens? Well, what kind of language? And also, are you going to be keeping an eye out that the same language comes from both sides as well?
Well, first, if there's a joint press conference, I think that would be an extraordinary visual. It'll be very interesting to watch what the two leaders say there. I'd be looking to see whether President Putin repeats his maximalist demands, whether he goes beyond the issue of territory and starts getting towards some of the other concessions that he would demand from Ukraine as part of a final settlement. Remember, the territory is not the only thing on the table. The Ukrainian withdrawal from Donbass, which Kyiv, of course, has rejected, is just Putin's price merely to get to the ceasefire. And then there'd be a whole host of other things, Ukrainian neutrality, demilitarization, etc., all of which Kyiv is rejecting. So, and then I'm looking for President Trump. Is he going to kind of take Putin to task, at least behind closed doors? Is he going to kind of drive the message home that as long as Putin is demanding these non-starters from Ukraine as the price for peace, well, then it's never going to happen?
I think Heidi asks a good question. Heidi's in Virginia. She asks, how many delegates are coming with Putin and how many with Trump? How many people will be in the same room with Putin and Trump? How do these things typically look, John?
Well, summits can be different. Tomorrow we'll have a tete-a-tete between the two leaders and their translators, and then a larger group after that. At least that's what they've said. 5 senior officials joining each leader. On the Russian side, you have like foreign minister, defense minister, foreign policy aide, and some economic folks. Somewhat similar mix on the U.S. side.
And one thing that, again, we're going to go through a range of audience questions here. William asking this, Trump is very pro-business. Do you think deals will be made that include financing or even investments by Russia in the United States? What's the business angles you're watching for, John?
Well, both sides, since President Trump took office in January, have been trying to use the prospect of cooperation, including on economic issues, to try to incentivize the other to come closer to the position they want on Ukraine. The Russians have sort of tried to split the Ukraine question from U.S.-Russia relations, although they, I think, still are conditioning certain things like arms control agreements on what they would see as a satisfactory resolution to the Ukraine crisis. And I think the same goes for the United States. At least so far, the position has been that sanctions relief, things of that nature, would not happen until a settlement is reached. So it will be very interesting to watch to see if the administration is offering any sorts of partial sanction relief, maybe in exchange for a ceasefire, not the full settlement, but a ceasefire I think there's been reports that perhaps lifting the export ban on like parts and equipment for maintenance of Russia's airliners, many of which are in need of kind of U.S. inputs to keep them airworthy.
So obviously the glaring thing about tomorrow's meeting is Vladimir Zelensky won't be in attendance. Daniel in Rhode Island asks, President Trump says that he'd like to very quickly have a second meeting, including Zelensky. If this first meeting goes well, is there anything to suggest that Putin is on the same page relating to this course of action and sequence of events? Has Putin been as friendly to the idea of an eventual trilateral summit as Trump has been?
So Putin rejected a trilateral this time around. I think he'll continue to do that until he gets to the point where he thinks, okay, a deal is kind of ready to go. Now I have to go kind of force it on Kyiv. What he wants is to get Trump's help in kind of accepting the Russian maximalist terms and then trying to make Kyiv swallow that. So if Putin views a summit with Zelensky as kind of the last step, whereas Trump wants it to be something that kind of gives some momentum to the process. I do think for President Trump, pushing Putin to negotiate with Zelensky is important. The mantra, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, is very, very important. We can't be seen to be negotiating over the Ukrainians' heads, not least because a deal like that just won't work. I think Putin actually overestimates how much leverage Trump has over Zelensky. There are certain lines the Ukrainians are just not going to cross.
So President Trump keeps saying that he just wants to see the dying stop. He wants the fighting to stop. He wants people to stop dying. The goal here is to reach a ceasefire. Byron asks the big question: what are the immediate consequences if we do see some sort of failure at tomorrow's meeting? What if it doesn't go well tomorrow, John? What happens in the immediate term?
Well, it's a great question, and I guess I should admit that I'm not very optimistic about the prospects for the summit, given that how far away the two sides are and the fact that Putin is still sticking to these hardline demands. So I think that the consequence would unfortunately be more killing. And I hate to say it, but I think many more Russian soldiers are going to have to lose their lives needlessly in this war until Putin finally realizes he can't kind of gain any more territory or leverage through continued fighting. And hopefully what could speed along his conclusion that it's time to accept a ceasefire is more economic pressure. So I would hope to see, assuming the summit does not go well, or at least Putin does not begin to strike a more compromising tone, I would hope that President Trump would return to his economic pressure that he's been sort of gearing up on prior to his sending his envoy Steve Witkoff to Moscow.
Is there anything, before we go, is there anything that you feel isn't being discussed enough about this meeting?
Well, I hate to say it, but I think we went to this meeting a bit prematurely. I think that the economic pressure, we're kind of starting to get on a roll, as I mentioned a minute ago. The secondary tariffs on India. I think President Trump was getting to a place where he's ready to go even farther than that. And then Witkoff went to Moscow, and we kind of get thrown this curveball with the summit. Frankly, I think it kind of interrupted the process we needed to follow to get Putin eventually to a point where he's ready to stop. And so I fear that this will set us back some, but we will eventually get back to that process of focusing on economic pressure, support for Ukrainian forces, exhausting Russian military offensive potential, and then perhaps sometime later this year or next year, maybe the conditions are a little more ripe for peace.
John Hardie is the Deputy Director of the Russia Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Glad to do it.